and reinvest the savings in crime prevention and drug treatment. But we are only scratching the surface. We sit here today amidst a global pandemic that has sickened and killed Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, and other communities of color at disproportionate rates. Racism and racial disparities impact every part of our culture and our economy, and the pandemic has further exacerbated these disparities. People of color are less likely to have the income or the savings that make it easy to stay home from work. People of color are more likely to work on frontline jobs during the pandemic in our hospitals, in our agricultural and food processing industries, in grocery stores, and in home health care. People of color are less likely to have access to high-quality health care coverage, and the list goes on and on. As we work to reopen the economy and build a safer and stronger Oregon, I am committed to putting the needs of our marginal communities at the forefront of our recovery plan. You will see more of this in the days and the weeks to come. Words are not enough. We need action. We need collective action. The Oregon Health Authority will be releasing details on this and other community-specific testing sites in the next few days. But now, before I turn the microphone over to my colleagues, let me say a few words about the dynamics of the protests, particularly here in the city of Portland. On Friday, thousands of people gathered at several peaceful protests across the city. This was a cry for action, a call for reform, a community in mourning. Then, very late at night, much smaller groups decided to break windows and damage property. Senseless violence does not honor George Floyd's death or create accountability. Only the hard work of racial justice will. On Saturday night, there were more protests, some additional property destruction, and the city instituted a curfew. Mayor Wheeler asked me over the weekend to mobilize the National Guard and put them in direct confrontation with protesters. This wasn't the first time that the mayor asked to mobilize the National Guard, and not the first time I have declined. Last night, rather than putting soldiers on the streets of Portland, I directed the Oregon State Police to deploy additional officers to support Portland Police and the Sheriff's Department. We took these state police from other communities and sent them to Portland to assist the city and the Sheriff's Office. We also had 50 National Guard members on standby nearby and ready to deploy within minutes in the event local law enforcement found themselves overwhelmed. Last night, they were not requested. I want to thank Superintendent Hampton and the state police for their dedication, their flexibility, and their willingness to answer the call of service. This morning, the mayor renewed his request for National Guard members. In other cities across Oregon, local mayors have had very collaborative relationships and are able to share law enforcement personnel between cities and county. This used to be the case in Portland, and I encourage the mayor to rebuild these collaborative law enforcement agreements with neighboring counties and communities. Now, after 3 nights of protest, local law enforcement personnel are in need of assistance. After consulting with Oregon State Police Superintendent Travis Hampton, I'm sending 100 state police from around the state at state expense to support the Portland Police Bureau. I've also decided to call in 50 Oregon National Guard members to provide a support function only. They will not be on the front lines, making arrests or doing crowd control. They will only be acting as support personnel behind the scenes only. And here's why. Our goal, and the goal of the overwhelming number of protesters, should be to reduce violence. You don't diffuse violence by putting soldiers on our streets. Having soldiers on the streets across America is exactly what President Trump wants. He's made that very clear on a call this very morning with governors across the entire United States. Trump wants governors to deploy the National Guard as a show of force to intimidate the public. I want to ensure that the public can safely raise their voices in this much-needed call for reform. Our National Guard members are Oregonians, taking time away from their families to serve their fellow Oregonians. They are volunteers. They will be on hand to provide support to local officials, comfort and care for the injured, processing arrests, and directing traffic, much as they do when they're asked to be called in to assist with wildfires. I'm incredibly grateful for their service. Now, I will turn it over to City of Portland Commissioner Joanne Hardesty.
Thank you, Governor Brown, and thank you very much for answering the call that the City of Portland made. As a city commissioner who was on duty on Friday when the mayor was out of town, I went downtown once I heard the calls for 4 fire engines to go to one site. I knew something big was going on. And when I got downtown, what I realized was that there were 2 types of people that were downtown. There were people that had come downtown to exercise their rights, to be heard by their government. And then there was the other group that had infiltrated the peaceful protester groups and broke off into splinter groups with the sole purpose of destruction of our community. As the person in charge at that time, I felt absolutely not. We have to close this down. Now, anyone who knows me knows I'm normally the one with a bullhorn at a protest. And I am always someone who absolutely respects the public's right to seek redress from their government. But when we allow white nationalists and white supremacists to infiltrate our peaceful protests, and this isn't new, they did the same thing in the 60s, so we know the tactics that are used. When we allow them to infiltrate our legal, rightful protests, and then create the kind of chaos and damage in our community, we must make that stop. I was the commissioner on duty that called for the curfew the first night. If I had my way, the curfew would be lifted tonight, but I have fingers and toes crossed, it will be lifted tomorrow. Because I am concerned that the public will feel with National Guard and with a curfew that has basically been ignored, that there will be this overpresence of police. I am so grateful to the state police and the superintendent because tonight won't be the first time that they have assisted us when we have had needs in this community. And I have heard from Chief Resch that the state police have been real good partners in this effort. But as has Clackamas County and Washington County on various occasions when we've asked them to step in and help us. I want to be crystal clear. We are not entering martial law. We are not going to have armed people on every corner in the city of Portland. We will make sure that the space is there for people to exercise their constitutional rights. And I want to make sure that we don't forget why people are on the street in the first place. People didn't take to the streets so that they could break into an Apple store. People took to the street because people have had enough of the inequality that African Americans experience in this country. Every social determinant of health has Native Americans and African Americans at the bottom. So whether you're talking housing, education attainment, across the board, this has been neglected for too long. Elected officials for too long have paid lip service to equity and equality in our community. And I think what brought this to a boiling point is 3 years of number 45 being blatantly racist and sexist and homophobic and anti-immigrant and anti-refugee. I think this is what finally brought this to a head. When the person in the highest level of government is so disrespectful to the diversity and the equity that makes the United States great, it has allowed these white supremacist worms to crawl out of the woodwork and be seen in the public eye, and to actually become bolder and bolder the more 45 tweets the nonsense that he tweets. It is our responsibility to make sure that everyone in this community is safe. And I want to also especially point out that we have houseless people living on the street. And so imagine someone came into your house and started busting out windows and started throwing things at individuals, and started creating violent confrontations that required law enforcement to intervene. You would not like it any more than the people who are forced to live on our street. And so this message is to the protesters who are really about equality, who are really about fixing our broken systems. I see you. I am with you. And I hope we take advantage of this opportunity now, when the world is paying attention, to not just pay lip service, but to fundamentally look at all our systems, and if they're broken, fix them. The last thing I will say is I hope when protesters take to the street tonight, that they will take to the street with the same vision, with the same purpose that Dr. King brought to the civil rights movement. It is clear to me that when people speak truth to power, we can change things. But when a small group of people just want to be destructive and tear up our community, we will not accept that. But Governor, I also want to share my fear. After 3 nights of thousands of people side by side protesting, I am very concerned that COVID-19 will be exacerbated in Multnomah County, and it will be exacerbated because we know that Black and brown people suffer 3 times harsher outcomes with COVID-19 than the white population. So while I understand the need to protest, I'm asking people, please be mindful that we are still smack dab in the center of a pandemic. And yes, civil rights are important, racial justice is necessary, but we have to live in order to be able to change the systems that have been oppressing Black people since we got here. So if you can, please stay home tonight. Love your family, and let's get to the business of fixing our broken systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Superintendent Hampton.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Commissioner, for your words. My name is Travis Hampton. I'm Superintendent of the Oregon State Police. I'm just going to give some very brief comments about our relationship with the Portland Police Bureau, the dedication of resources to the City of Portland this evening, and the integration of National Guard personnel. First, the Commissioner touched on this earlier. I want to really underscore the positive relationship we have with the Portland Police Bureau. I worked for the Oregon State Police for 3 decades. I've been assisting in the city for years. The city of Portland is a well-led, well-equipped police agency. Their current police chief, Chief Resch, is a gifted and compassionate leader. So when she makes the call to the Oregon State Police to come and assist her, it is without reservation that I would send my personnel to her city to help her to deal with the policing events that we're currently encountering. There is no doubt demonstrations of these sizes present a great deal of challenges for law enforcement. They are very resource intensive to try to ensure that the demonstrations are allowed to proceed in a peaceful manner. And if a small number of citizens decide to destroy property or harm other individuals, we have the obligation to act and react. A city this size with this population takes a great deal of personnel to respond to the event. So at the governor's direction, the Oregon State Police will dedicate 100 Oregon State Police troopers to the city center tonight. These OSP troopers have been arriving from all over the state, beginning in the early AM this morning, to underscore what type of commitment this is by the governor. 100 state troopers is commensurate with 25% of the Oregon State Police Patrol Division for the entire state. So those are the number of personnel that we'll have arriving in Portland to assist. We are happy to do it. We think it's warranted. And once again, I have no reservation of putting these personnel under the command of Chief Resch and her command staff to assist her in policing the city. The last element I'll touch on will be the integration of the Oregon National Guard to assist Oregon State Police troopers, deputy sheriffs, and Portland police officers this evening. OSP has a very long-standing positive relationship with the Oregon National Guard. We deploy with them every summer for wildfires. They are very well trained. They're very well led. They're very well equipped. This is a unique role to integrate them into a policing environment. The governor mentioned this earlier, and I also want to reassure citizens of Portland that these National Guard personnel will be used in a support role. But this is critical for the Oregon State Police and Portland Police Bureau because every National Guard asset we place in a support role, this frees up a police officer, state trooper to interact with the public. The governor's made it very clear to me that police officers do the policing. The soldiers will serve in a support role, and that's why they will be deploying throughout the city alongside Oregon State Police troopers and integrated into the overarching tactical plan with the Portland Police Bureau. I have no reservation about the training or qualifications of these personnel or the command and control of the commitment of the Portland Police Bureau to deliver what's best for its citizens. And that's why the Oregon State Police is honored to participate and assist the city during their time of need. Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent Hampton. And if I may, I'd like to ask Senator Frederick if he wishes to say a few words. And welcome.
Thank you, Governor. I really haven't had a chance to speak out on this. I've had other issues that I've been dealing with over time, so I really appreciate this chance. I will start off with a quote from Dr. King. He said, "Let us be dissatisfied until those who live on the outskirts of hope are brought into the metropolis of daily security." The last time I marched with Dr. King, I was about 16 years old. I believe that was in Atlanta, and we were marching to deal with all sorts of other issues, economic, schools, et cetera. We marched. We had people on the side of the street yelling at us and throwing things at the time. Some things have changed, but we're here because some fundamental things have not changed. I still wonder whether I'm going to die when I see a police car behind me. It has been about 5 years since I was stopped in front of my house and asked if I was lost in Irvington, where I've lived since 1977. We have a basic fear. I have a basic fear that comes up. And it is because of that fear and because of the examples that we've seen most recently that I'm glad to get a chance to be here. Let me suggest that this is a basic problem with how we look at issues regularly. We're talking about a system change here, and everyone's talked about systemic change and systemic issues, and every public discussion talks about that. For many, the police were seen as great, except for a few bad apples. For many, demonstrators were seen as righteous, except for a few knuckleheads. But bad apples often spoil because of the way they're packed, the environment that they're placed in, the mold that's already there. We need to changing the environment for police to find out. We need to find out what racism, what mold is growing there for police. We need to do a number of things. I will be introducing a series of bills along with the People of Color Caucus to deal with arbitration, to deal with use of force, vetting what kind of training takes place, and a number of bills, probably up to about 15. I've been introducing some of these bills for quite a while, and they are an attempt to try to deal with the bad apples, to sort out the bad apples, to make sure that, in fact, we aren't going to allow folks to come in, and perhaps to train it so that we are, in fact, changing some things. We did a number of things in the last session that dealt with recruitment, psychological issues as well, and we've done some things in terms of profiling. But that's not enough. It's been piecemeal, and I started working on some of these things when I first got into the legislature in 2010. Now, we have some folks who have decided that their role is to disrupt and distract from what the issues are regarding the police and respect. We have folks who have decided to take advantage of things. I think Commissioner Councilor Hardesty was very eloquent in talking about how we know that there are folks who really want us to drift into a fascist system. And I don't use 45, I use *3 as my description of him. But we have folks who want to do that. The good news is we have technological tools available to us and the ability to find out who these folks are who are instigating these things. And I think we're going to be discovering those folks. There are surveillance cameras that we can identify some of the people committing the crimes, and we should proceed to apprehend these criminals as soon as we possibly can. But because this involves a larger context, it's not a reason to shut down public expression of the majority of people. And if we do that, the criminals, or worse, folks like the Proud Boys and the other folks, actually win. We Americans have never let thugs and criminals interfere with the exercise of our freedoms, and we're not going to let them silence us now. We aren't going to follow the guidance of the *3 to turn our weapons against our fellow citizens. We need to make sure that that's how we're going to approach it. I'll end because, frankly, it is difficult for me to talk about this. And I talk an awful lot, but there are some things that trigger a number of responses. I had a King City police officer pull a gun on me while I was in a Channel 8 news car back in the early 90s. And I was a passenger, so the photographer, who was the driver, suddenly saw the barrel of a gun right across his face pointed at me. I have seen and dealt with, as Commissioner Hardesty has, so many marches and so many times when we have seen someone killed or maimed in this city, and we have all tried to find a way to stop this. I am pleased to see the allies of all colors now stepping forward to do something about this, and it is time. We've had enough. I want to see some action, and I hope we will. I'm going to end with a quote from another president. He said, "The point of protest is to raise public awareness, to put a spotlight on injustice, and to make the powers that be uncomfortable. In fact, throughout American history, it has often only been in response to the protests and civil disobedience, but that the political system has even paid attention to marginalized communities. But eventually, aspirations have to come down to action. And we will have bills, I hope, in the special session, and perhaps and certainly in the 2021 session, that will attempt to address that so that we are no longer dealing with the folks who slip through the cracks and do not understand the basic concept of respect for one another. So I thank you for your work, and I thank Commissioner Hardesty for her work as well. We will have a group, people may not know this now, but we have a People of Color Caucus in the Oregon legislature, which is extraordinary and truly enjoyable. And so we will be presenting bills of one form or another to deal with these particular issues, as well as the COVID crisis and the impact it's had on housing, on health care, on education, on all sorts of economic issues. So thank you again, Governor.
Thank you, Senator Frederick. Thank you for your leadership. We have time for questions. If folks are willing to respond to questions, we would be happy to take them. Charles.
Just a reminder that folks on the line, please press 0 to get into the question queue. We'll start out with Lauren Dake from OPD. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, Governor. Thank you. Could you elaborate on what you mean by support role? What specifically will the National Guard soldiers be doing? And then just to follow on that quickly, what made you, we heard this morning that you were very reticent to send out Guard troops. You were worried about how they would be perceived and that they could possibly sort of escalate the situation. What made you rethink that?
I think that reticence was well-founded. Lauren, I was concerned that by putting our soldiers on the streets, that it would escalate the situation. As I've been very clear, the National Guard members will be playing a support role only, providing assistance to Oregon State and other police officers, providing comfort and care to participants if they get injured, and processing folks that have been arrested. So they will not be on the front lines. You asked why sort of my move to make this decision. It's a capacity issue. We have roughly 700 troopers for the entire state of Oregon. By any measure, we are thinly staffed at the Oregon State Police. And they do an extraordinary job, but we have communities as far away as Klamath Falls, as Ontario, that may need their assistance tonight, tomorrow night as well. And so, frankly, it's a capacity issue. Commissioner Hardesty, did you like to add?
Yes, I would love to add to that. I talked to Chief Rice this morning because I will tell you, when the governor first called me and mentioned National Guard, I was no, right? It's like it was just the immediate response. And then I talked to my police chief, who says, I have folks who have been working almost 24 hours, 3 days in a row. I think we can all agree having tired police officers on the street doesn't benefit the public, and it certainly doesn't benefit the public employees who are sworn to protect and serve. And people don't make good decisions when they are tired, when they are frustrated, and when they've been working nonstop 3 days in a row. After talking to the police chief and talking to the governor again, and understanding that the roles would be about supporting folks who have been arrested, providing behind-the-scenes support that did not include having National Guard with weapons on our street, I was able to move my position from no to, okay, this makes sense at this time based on the current situation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Next up, we have Rachel Monahan from Last Week. Go ahead, Rachel.
Hi, Hi. So my question is about that. You mentioned, I'm slightly confused about the question of how you're assured that the National Guard will not be involved in policing. The governor mentioned directing traffic. Are they going to be carrying weapons? And are they going to be, like, will they be seen on the streets? Where is the guarantee that they will not be involved in interacting with protesters as things get, if they continue the way they have been past nights, will get quite harried?
Thank you, Rachel, for the question. Our Oregon National Guards men and women will not be armed. They are providing a support role only. And I'm going to let Superintendent Travis Hampton provide some more details.
Thank you, Governor. I will not speak directly to the tactics where these men and women will be assigned specifically, but I will give you a general response on the type of support duties that police officers are performing now. There needs to be personal needs met as far as food, as far as breaks. Vehicles need to be shuttled. We do have care for the injured if the situation ends up resulting in custody arrests. It is much more efficient to have police officers stay on the line to interact with citizens, and the custodies then can go behind the line of police officers for care, for medical treatment, for identification, for disposition of the arrest. So there's a myriad of functions that police officers, deputy sheriffs, and state troopers are performing now. This addition of 50 National Guard personnel will directly result in 50 additional police officers being put to use by the Portland Police Bureau this evening for crowd management and ensure the safety of the citizens of the city.
Okay, but will they be armed and will they be on the streets?
No, they won't be armed. We've said that about 3 times.
They will not be armed.
They will not be armed.
No.
Thanks, Rachel. Just a reminder to folks on the line, please press 0 if you'd like to get into the question queue. Our next question is from Megan Allison with A2. Go ahead, Megan.
Hi there. This question is for the governor. You mentioned that actions need to speak louder than words right now. What specific actions do you see as a priority to address racial disparities across the state at this time?
So we've certainly taken, under my leadership, taken steps from our work to reform the criminal justice system to our work to make significant investments in the African American community, the Latinx community, the Native American community here in Oregon in our education system, our significant investment in early childhood education and creating a system of care, and our work to ensure that Oregonians have access to health care regardless of their zip code and regardless of their income. Moving forward, I look forward to working with my partners at the local level, at the state level, to make significant strides in all 3 of these areas. My first step is going to be holding a listening session later this week with Commissioner Hardesty, the NAACP, and the Urban League. But I want to make really clear that this is not work that I can do alone. This needs to be collective work. All of us as Oregonians need to recommit ourselves. We need to roll up our sleeves and work towards social, economic, and criminal justice reform in this state. Now is the time. This is the opportunity to make this happen.
Thanks, Megan. If folks are having trouble getting into the line, please email your questions to Nikki Fisher. Otherwise, please press 0 to work with the operator. Next up, we've got Claire Whitcomb with the Statesman Journal. Go ahead, Claire.
Good afternoon. My question is for either Governor Brown or Senator Frederick. I'm wondering about whether either of you have specific proposals to stop police in Oregon from using military-style tools like riot gear, batons, and chemical agents.
Sure. Thank you very much. Let me just say that one of the bills that I'm looking at right now deals with the militarization of the police. One of the key elements, and there's an aspect that is not necessarily tools, but it's the approach that we've taken. In many cases, we have seen the police act as an occupying army in a community. And they, in fact, will talk about it being a situation of terms of engagement, which is a military term. Not rules of engagement is a military term. That is not a community policing term. That does not say that you are a part of that particular community. So I go from that particular approach, that we need to begin that approach. Now, we have had in the past the sale of high-level military equipment as though we are about to go into a war zone situation because it's been surplus military equipment. We need to look at that and determine whether that's appropriate or not. There are other approaches that need to be taken, and we need to reevaluate just what we're doing and how we are approaching the citizens, the fellow citizens in the community. That's a different approach than what we've seen in the past.
And if I might add, I mean, I think there's not one area of the criminal justice system that does not need to be analyzed for racial disparate outcomes and fixed. One great example is DPSST, the Department of Public Safety Standards and Practices. When I read about the former Portland police officer who was in the gang enforcement unit, then went to work for West Lynn, and then got fired because of his racially inappropriate behavior. And then I find out that he became the #2 person at the training facility that trains law enforcement all over the state of Oregon. I think we all have an obligation wherever we are. Me at the city level, I'm thrilled we have a new Multnomah County DA coming in, Mike Smith, who is absolutely reform-minded already. I think it's important that the legislature look at up and down and see what they can find. The governor looks up and down and sees what they can find. But there's not one easy fix that's going to make our justice system fair. But we have an obligation and a responsibility to look up and down wherever we sit in the spectrum and make sure that we are looking at it through a racial justice lens. And if it comes out that it is not a racially just outcomes, then we need to tear it apart and start over.
And Commissioner Hardesty is exactly right. There's not one silver bullet. It's going to take a lot of buckshot. And it is both regulatory changes in our system. It is changing statutes, changing the law. It is changing systems and changing culture. And, of course, funding changes. And I'm confident that all of us working together can ensure that we have an Oregon that is better for everyone.
Thanks, Claire. Next up, we have John McCarthy from KECI Eugene. Go ahead, John.
This question is for Governor Brown, and it's Connor McCarthy from KZI 9 News. I just had a quick question about just your response and your support to the Eugene community and the metro area down in the South Willamette Valley, because we did have protests and violent riots Friday night. I was just wondering if you had any conversations with the community leaders down in the metro area, and if so, how are you supporting them and keeping our community safe?
Great question. Did have a conversation with Mayor Lucy Vinnis sometime this weekend. I don't remember the time. And spoke with Senator Manning earlier today. And that is one of the reasons why I've made the decision I made regarding the National Guard, is that I wanted to make sure that we had adequate capacity of our Oregon State Police to protect Oregonians around the entire state.
Okay, and are any of those resources going to help out the Eugene community, like EPD or state police in the metro area?
I'll let Superintendent Hampton respond to that.
Hi, Travis Hampton with OSB, and I'll also give you the real-world example from last night. We had demonstration events occurring in Klamath Falls, Eugene, obviously the city of Portland and Salem, our own state capital. So the respective police leaders from those entities, those venues, were communicating via video teleconference every other hour, every odd hour, up until 1 o'clock this morning. We are shifting resources by the hour. OSP resources statewide, we're on 24-hour emergency operations shift. That means wherever the respective police chief or the governor directs those resources, every trooper within 100 miles that is on duty would respond to that location. So that our OSP resources are in that mode this evening. We'll respond anywhere in the state. By the governor directing National Guard personnel to the city of Portland, that will free up 50 state troopers to respond to Lane County, to Klamath County, to the heart and lungs of the Oregon State Police operation, our state capital, which has seen a need for additional personnel the last 3 nights.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Connor. Next up, we have Alex Zielinski with the Portland Mercury. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, yeah. Several of you mentioned white supremacists taking advantage of these demonstrations. Someone mentioned Proud Boys. I'm curious if you have specific evidence or proof that there are white supremacy groups that are specifically infiltrating these protests, and what that looks like.
Yes, in fact, we've seen pictures of some of the Proud Boys that are regular visitors to our great city, actually down at protests over the last 3 days. There's been a lot of pictures posted of Proud Boys and white supremacists on Facebook and in other locales. I can tell you in my conversations and briefings with the police chief, they have acknowledged that there are agitators who are there solely for the purpose of creating chaos. And so there's no question, not just here in Oregon, but all over the nation. And I can't prove that it is an attempt to disrupt our election cycle, but I do think it is a nationally orchestrated effort to interrupt our November elections.
If you may,
Senator Frederick.
I have I had until about a couple of months ago tried to attend to as many of the demonstrations downtown as I possibly could. I would sit off to the side and watch and observe who was there and who was not. It was not in an official capacity, but it was something that I thought I could do relatively easily. And what I found over the time was watching some of the folks who were classified themselves as Proud Boys or whatever, disguising themselves and go into a corner, into a side, disguise themselves and put on black hoods and whatever and black things, and then walk into the crowd and try to create problems, try to throw things from the back of the crowd towards the police, try to do all sorts of things, and then go back and join the Proud Boys again as part of their effort. These are the kinds of things that I saw while I was out on the street. Now, I probably would not have gotten a chance to see that as a reporter, because as a reporter, I would have been paying attention to a lot of other different things. But as just an observer, as watching from the side, I saw things taking place that were clearly this group trying to set up agents provocateurs. And I remember a fellow who decided that he was going to try to get us to use C4 in peace demonstrations in the 60s. We decided to let him know that we were not going to do that. So it is an old story. It's an old approach. It is a tactical approach, and we know that that's what's going on. The question is what we can do about it and how we disrupt the disruptors.
Thanks, Alex. The next question is from Monica Semiello with OPB. Go ahead, Monica.
Hi, this is for Governor Brown. What are your thoughts on the mass gatherings around the state amid the coronavirus pandemic? Do you think we'll see a spike in cases in Multnomah County, especially in Black and Brown communities who are on the front lines of the protest? And if so, would that delay the county's June 12th phase 1 reopening?
Thank you for the question, Monica. Yes, I'm certainly concerned about people's safety during protests. I am absolutely committed to making sure that Oregonians and frankly Americans have the ability to use their voices to improve our democracy, to eradicate racial discrimination in our criminal justice system, in our education system, in our economy, and in our healthcare system. But I want to encourage protesters to stay safe. And that means continuing to wear your face coverings if you feel that you need to be out on the streets, to maintain social distancing 6 feet apart to the extent possible, and obviously to continue to use hand sand and wash your hands. The safest option is probably the one that Commissioner Hardesty mentioned, and that is stay home, spend some more time with your families.
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.
Our next question is from, we've got time for probably just 2 more questions. Next question is from Jonathan Bott with the Portland Business Journal.
Hi, Governor. This is Jonathan with the PBJ. I was just reading over a story of one of my colleagues, Matt Kish, and he wrote about how there's a lack of diversity on the Oregon Council of Economic Advisors. I also tuned into the meeting on Friday, and as Matt points out here, it's mostly made up of white men. What are you doing to diversify that panel of economic advisors who are giving you advice at this critical time in Oregon's economic history?
Thank you for that question. The council participated in a listening, I think a discussion session with the legislature last week. I think that was the first time that had happened. And it became very clear. And we are working to change who is on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. When I started, I don't believe there were any women. There are now a few women. And with the help of some of my colleagues in the Oregon legislature, I'm confident that we can have a council that reflects the diversity of our communities very quickly, and we're going to make that happen. It's my expectation that we stop talking and start taking action. That means continuing to do the work around changing our boards and commissions. That means making sure that our state government reflects the many faces of Oregon, that our agency directors look like the diverse communities of Oregon, that our statutes in this state work to eradicate racial, ethnic, gender, and sexual orientation discrimination. Now is the time to do this work. I think we can all take collective action and truly make a difference.
Thanks, Jonathan. Our last question is from Lachey Wesley with K2. Go ahead, Lachey.
Hi. So my question is for Governor Brown and Commissioner Hardesty. Do you think that the additional state troopers may provoke some of the protesters and demonstrators? And a question for state troopers is, what experience and training does Oregon State Police have with crowd management?
Go ahead, Commissioner Hardesty.
So I will start. Yes, I think just the idea of bringing National Guard and state police into the city will annoy some people because they will see it as us increasing policing in the Portland metro area. But we really aren't. What we're doing is providing rest for the officers who have been on the front line nonstop. What we're doing is providing support that will not be from the National Guard, that won't include them having weapons, and it will not be a militarized support. It will simply be a softer support, a behind-the-scenes support. We have worked with the Oregon State Police more than once in the time that I have been on the city council, and probably a lot more times that I don't know about. And so there's a seamless effort when we have mutual aid between policing agencies. There's just a mutual, and we work very well together through that mutual aid process. And so I don't think there should be any concerns about Oregon State Police. But as a black woman, I could certainly understand the fear that bringing a National Guard would bring to the community. And yes, I expect some people to be really annoyed. I expect us to have more protesters tonight and not less. But what I want them to know is I want to be very clear. There will not be more weapons on the street. There will be basically the same number of law enforcement personnel doing the work of protecting the people in our community. We can replace property, but we can never replace people who lose their lives through this process.
Thank you. This is Travis Hampton with State Police. As I referenced earlier, state troopers have been responding to the city of Portland for decades, specifically for crowd control measures all over Oregon, quite frankly. The fact that you asked that question on what it will look like, you must not have noticed, we've been here for the last 2 days. State troopers we've had 50 crowd control troopers here that are specifically trained and equipped to handle large-scale demonstration, to first and foremost ensure the right of these citizens to protest, to keep them happy and moving freely, to keep them from interference. But in the chance that some citizens decide to break the law and fail to clear a roadway, for example, at the direction of the Portland Police Bureau, then Oregon State Police troopers would assist Portland RRT with the Oregon State Police MRT, Mobile Response Team, these 50 specially trained troopers that are more than equipped and experienced to handle these situations.
Great. Thanks, Lachey. That's all the time we have for questions today.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Thank you, Representative Janelle Bynum. Thank you, Senator Frederick. Thank you, Superintendent Travis Hampton. We appreciate you all being here with us and appreciate your time and energy. Be safe out there.